the opinion of Jamie Metzl and Matt Pollinger at the Wall Street Journal, more than 3 years after the start of the global pandemic, there has yet to be a comprehensive forensic investigation into its origins.
In August 2021, evolutionary biologists Edward C. Holmes and Christian G. Anderson had firmly stated failure to comprehensively investigate the zoonotic origin through collaborative and carefully coordinated studies would leave the world vulnerable to future pandemics arising from the same human activities that have repeatedly put us on a collision course with novel viruses. WHO Director Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus posted on Twitter in mid-March, "Understanding COVID-19's origins and exploring all hypotheses remains a scientific imperative to help us prevent future outbreaks, and a moral imperative for the sake of the millions of people who died and those who live with long COVID." This statement added an imperative nuance to his statement to the UN at the end of December 2021, that surely we have learned by now that we underestimate this virus at our own peril. As reported in February by the Associated Press, teaming with Forbes magazine correspondents, Farnish Amiri and Norman Merchant, the Republican chairman of the House Oversight Committee and the Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic requested information from several people, including Dr. Anthony Fauci, surrounding the hypothesis that the coronavirus leaked accidentally from a Chinese lab. At that time, the letters to Fauci, National Intelligence Director Avril Haines, Health Secretary Xavier Becerra and others were the latest effort by the new Republican majority to make good on promises made during the 2022 midterms campaign. At that time, the nation's most trusted voice in pandemic had told Felice J. Freya of the Boston Globe that we may never know the origins of the novel coronavirus, but had expressed his belief that most evidence appeared to support a natural origin. In April, National Review journalist Ori Bluff had reported that Anthony Fauci had forcefully denied suppressing the lab leak theory in the early days of the pandemic, after former CDC Director Robert Redfield accused the former chief White House medical advisor of sidelining him from conversations about COVID's origins. But, in late-breaking news from Breitbart, the former head of China's Center for Disease Control, CDC, Gao Fu, or George Gao, told the BBC in a podcast published on Tuesday that scientists should not rule out the possibility that the Wuhan coronavirus began spreading as a result of a laboratory leak. And, still even after 3 years, many remain divided on the question regarding a natural spillover from a zoonotic source, still unknown, or a laboratory leak. Is it possible that the novel coronavirus's origins remain unknown because it is actually alien, a disease left on Earth by an extraterrestrial? As reported by Catherine Hignett of Newsweek in October 2018, panspermia is a hotly debated concept. Various versions suggest microbes, viruses and even tiny life forms like the tardigrade might travel dormant from space rock to space rock via collisions, eventually making their way to new planets. On a habitable planet like our own, they might wake up and thrive. According to Newsweek, octopuses are really weird. Masters of disguise, they camouflage the skin on their flailing, 8-armed bodies and dive hundreds of feet below the surface of the sea. The intelligent creatures have even been known to predict the odd sports result. And now, a group of 33 scientists from respected institutions around the world have suggested these bizarre creatures descend from organic alien material. Their research, published in the journal Progress in Biophysics and Molecular Biology, ties the remarkable rise of octopuses and their cephalopod cousins to the theory of panspermia. Might this explain the origins of a novel coronavirus that continues to baffle the scientists and continues to divide even the intelligence community? Dr. Christian G. Anderson, a research scientist at the prestigious Scripps Research Laboratories, as well as the author of the definitive report on zoonotic evolution for the proximal origins of SARS-CoV-2, had come under fire regarding his original claims that some of the features, potentially, look engineered. And yet, at that time, in late January 2020, Dr. Anderson had said that Eddie, Bob, Mike and myself all find the genome inconsistent with expectations from evolutionary theory. Might Dr. Anderson and his colleagues discovered an alien species of virus? Since studies of relative synonymous codon usage, RSCU, bias between viruses and their hosts suggested that viruses tends to evolve codon usage bias that is comparable to their hosts, one scientific researcher, Wei Ji, not widely discussed in the press, had, in fact, by mid-February 2020, observing that the plurality of the early cases appeared to have a history of exposure to the virus at the Huanan seafood wholesale market where poultry, bats, snakes, and other wildlife animals were also sold, and had carried out comprehensive sequence analysis and comparison in conjunction with relative synonymous codon usage, RSCU, bias among different animal species based on the 2019 nCoV sequence, and the results obtained from those analyses suggested that the 2019 nCoV may appear to be a recombinant virus between the bat coronavirus and an origin unknown coronavirus, and noting that He recombination may occur within the viral spike glycoprotein, which recognizes a cell surface receptor. These findings suggested that 2019 nCoV had most similar genetic information with bat coronavirus and most similar codon usage bias with snake, confirming reports in the news on CNN, from chief science reporter Dr. Sanjay Gupta, that snakes, specifically the Chinese kite and the Chinese cobra, may be the original source of the newly discovered coronavirus that has triggered an outbreak of a deadly infectious respiratory illness in China this winter. And yet, problematic for a possible link to a snake origin, while there are over 3,000 coronaviruses that infect mammals, and there are over 3,000 that infect birds, there are no known snake or even reptile coronaviruses, suggesting that possibly the origins of the novel coronavirus may have come from out of this world. This was a species-specific test, certainly researchers knew, or should have known that, coronaviruses are exclusive to mammalian and avian species, warranting the exclusion of ophidian or reptilian species from the scope of the inquiry, but for the observation that researchers had found evidence of a recombinant virus, concerns that would find temporal coincidence with concerns expressed by Dr. Anderson, who would also, later, report details about animals for sale at the Huanan market. Up until November 2019. Even retrospective testing of livestock and poultry using SARS-CoV-2 N80 from a total of 12,092 animal tissue and swab samples, collected in 2018 to 2019 from 26 provinces and autonomous regions, including Heilongjiang, Liaoning, Tianjin, Hebei, Fujian, Anhui, Shandong, Hunan, Guangxi, Guangdong, Yunnan, Sichuan, Shaanxi, Xinjiang, Jiangsu, Jiangxi, Ningxia, Tibet, Jilin, Shanghai, Hubei, Zhejiang, Qinghai, Inner Mongolia and Guizhou, and testing for SARS-CoV-2 nucleic acid, including 5,000 pig, 131 cattle, 368 sheep, and 6,593 poultry samples, had found all results returning negative. Even recent suggestions from evolutionary biologist Michael Warlby that the origins may have been a raccoon dog, which were amongst animals sold at the market, have come up cold, because, as it turns out, raccoon dogs are hibernators that hibernate in the months of November and December, when the outbreak in China had apparently began. Is it possible that the beginning of the outbreak was an alien virus, the result of some accidental encounter, or even a hostile release from an invading extraterrestrial and advanced society? Under the present paradigm in science, virus particles remain the most abundant biological particles in the world, according to Patrick Fortré, and according to Mark Woolhouse, before a current novel coronavirus, only the seventh human coronavirus, there had been only a total of 219 harmful to mankind, making, by function of the law of large numbers, Any threat posed by viruses as emerging threats, extremely remote. And, by simple probability, there would be low confidence of an emerging virus threat, this being infinitesimally small, at least when considering the law of large numbers, and limited to a terrestrial origin for this novel coronavirus here on Earth. Further, it is of note that coronaviruses are known to be the largest in genome mass, which genome size makes them the most unstable, necessitating that, in order to maintain genetic stability, the large genome size requires unusual enzymatic activities, such as an exoribonuclease and an enteribonuclease activity replication transcription complex. However, some studies counter that. The data revealed that while the conservation rate was relatively low upstream and downstream along the genome, it was high near the central region. And, accordingly, apparently, through natural selection and evolution, the coronavirus appears to have adapted to its self-destructive mass, through gains of function, creating a safe zone in which mutations may occur, imposing a natural stability, but presenting clear and convincing evidence of another possible origin for the novel coronavirus, not of this world. How else, given that, at least before the evolving science of the pandemic, reproducibility and replicability are fundamentally important aspects of the scientific method, could this novel coronavirus have emerged and thrived, spawning multiple mutant variants of concern and aberration from their nature? Perhaps the answer is not to be found here on Earth, but in the heavens above. Far more problematic is that according to the online course published by the American CDC, there are only two primary metrics to be determined for an emerging infectious virus, one of which is the infectious dose, and according to the American CDC, the infectious dose of SARS-CoV-2 needed to transmit infection has not been established, which, after 3 years of a pandemic, would suggest that the information is being treated as if it were classified information, but then why would not we have been told? Far more intriguing, it was known very early in the public health crisis that, even if not widely discussed, that researchers, led by Jasper Faku-Chon, had required between 100,000 and 10 million particles of a suspected recombinant chimera acknowledged to have been adapted uniquely for acquisition to the human physiology to cause an infection of a Syrian hamster, which, ceteris paribus, should be far greater for a human infection, while early studies of the original strain found that it required at least an hour of exposure to transmit an infectious dose to only 10 of 93 persons seated in a 145 square meter dining room, restricted to a 30 square meter section, even if, according to a recent study, some persons, perhaps as high as 50%, appeared to be far more susceptible, lacking an apparent natural immunity, according to a recent challenge study, in which a healthy adult volunteers were challenged intranasally with SARS-CoV-2. Is it possible that, perhaps invisible or even shape-shifting aliens had been in the presence of the patrons at the restaurant in Guangzhou, infecting only those persons, accidentally, or far worse, with malicious intentions? From the available evidence, it appears that an extraterrestrial origin for the novel coronavirus may be possible, but it remains a possibility yet to have been explored even by the world's top scientists and even the intelligence community, while over the past 3 years, over 7 million persons have succumbed to a novel coronavirus, and scientists continue to look desperately for a cause here on Earth. As WHO Director Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus had warned the United Nations at the end of 2021, surely we have learned by now that we underestimate this virus at our own peril. Very often when identifying unexplained aerial phenomena, flight characteristics that defy known aerodynamic capabilities are considered to suggest some alien technology or otherworldly origin, and concerningly, with the novel coronavirus, after a robust review of some 55,924 laboratory-confirmed cases, conducted by 1,800 teams of at least 5 epidemiologists, by February 20, 2020, in China, it had been concluded, finding a variable secondary attack rate, ranging between 0.9% and 4.8%, that it is not clear whether this even correlates with the presence of an infectious virus. How could that be possible with 766,895,075 confirmed cases of COVID-19 worldwide? And yet, this is a clinical finding revalidated in the largest sample size trace contact study, to that date, performed in 2 cities in India in October 2020, and finding a secondary attack rate of only 4.6%. Far more intriguingly, since at least 1982, contrary to claims otherwise, to be capable of setting off a super-spreader event, a disease must be a validated highly contagious disease, like at least 60% secondary attack rate smallpox, making the virus that had emerged in China 12 times too low in secondary attack rate to be described as a highly contagious disease even capable of a super-spreader event, and one might, therefore, reasonably conclude, regarding an extraterrestrial origin, that the data speak for themselves. Impossible. So a video replays like the ones you are watching now, only just a few years ago. Perhaps one day science will finally discover the elusive origins of this novel coronavirus. And, oh, what an advance for science, but what a loss that will be for storytelling.
This message was approved by Major Mike Webb.